The air in the cellar was thick, heavy with the cloying sweet scent of spoiled meat and damp earth. Marshal John Hardin held his lantern high, its flickering light casting monstrous shadows that danced across the stone walls. His deputy, a young man named Miller, retched in the corner, his face pale as bleached bone. But Hardin's eyes were fixed on the far wall. It was the source of the smell. A collection of large, salt-cured barrels, their lids sealed tight with wax. They looked ordinary enough, the kind any respectable boarding house would use for preserving pork or beef through the long, humid Arkansas winter. Yet, there was something deeply unsettling about them, something that made the hairs on Hardin's arms stand on end. He'd come to the Willow Creek in investigating the disappearance of a traveling salesman, another soul swallowed by the vast, untamed wilderness of the Ozarks. The proprietors, Silas and Elspeth Blackwood, were pillars of their small hot springs community, pious, quiet, and utterly unremarkable. But the sheer number of guests who checked into their charming establishment and were never heard from again had become a statistical impossibility, a whispered horror that no one dared to speak aloud. Hardin took the pry bar from his belt, its metal scraping against the lid of the nearest barrel. The sound was obscene in the suffocating silence. With a final, groaning heave, the lid splintered open. The lantern light spilled inside, illuminating the contents. It wasn't pork. It wasn't beef. Packed in the coarse salt, pale and disturbingly familiar, was a human hand, its fingers slightly curled as if reaching for something it could never grasp. And beneath it, countless other pieces, other forgotten guests, their stories ending here, in the horrifying larder of the boarding house that cooked every guest. To understand the macabre reality that unfolded within the walls of the Willow Creek Inn, one must first understand the world outside them. The year was 1882. Hot Springs, Arkansas, was a town of stark and violent contradictions. It was a haven, a sanctuary built around the promise of healing geothermal waters that bubbled up from the earth's core. Thousands flocked to the town, seeking cures for ailments that baffled modern medicine: rheumatism, syphilis, consumption. They were desperate people, clinging to a final, shimmering hope. But for every hopeful pilgrim, there was a predator drawn to the scent of weakness and opportunity. The town was a raw, untamed corner of the American frontier, teeming with gamblers, con artists, outlaws, and men whose pasts were best left unexamined. It was a place where a person could arrive with a fortune and leave with nothing, or arrive with nothing and simply leave, disappear. The dense, labyrinthine forests of the Ouachita Mountains that surrounded the town were a perfect shroud, a place where secrets could be buried deep and bodies would never be found. In this churning sea of transience, where faces changed with the seasons and no one asked too many questions, a person vanishing was hardly an event. It was simply a Tuesday. This constant flow of anonymous, hopeful travelers created the perfect hunting ground. They were men and women disconnected from their families, carrying their life savings in their pockets, their arrivals unannounced and their departures unnoticed. They were looking for a room for the night, a warm meal, a friendly face. And in Silas and Elspeth Blackwood, proprietors of the quaint and tidy boarding house on the edge of town, they believed they had found just that. They could not have been more wrong. The Willow Creek Inn stood on a small plot of land just off the main road into Hot Springs, nestled in a grove of weeping willows that gave the establishment its name. From the outside, it was the very picture of rustic charm. A two-story clapboard structure painted a cheerful white, with a wide porch adorned with rocking chairs and pots of blooming geraniums. A thin plume of smoke almost always curled from its brick chimney, promising warmth and a home-cooked meal. To weary travelers who had spent days on dusty, unforgiving roads, it must have seemed like an oasis. Its proprietors, Silas and Elspeth Blackwood, cultivated this image with meticulous care. Silas was a large, quiet man in his late 40s, with hands as thick as slabs of ham and a presence that suggested brute strength held in careful reserve. He was rarely seen without his butcher's apron, tending to the smokehouse out back or hauling supplies from town. He spoke little, offering only curt nods and grunts which most interpreted as the simple shyness of a countryman. Elspeth was his opposite. She was the face of the inn, a thin, bird-like woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She was praised in town for her piety, her impeccable housekeeping, and most of all for her cooking. Her savory meat pies and hearty stews were legendary, drawing in not just boarders, but locals who would pay a handsome price for a plate. She managed the inn's finances with a shrewdness that belied her gentle demeanor, and her ledger was always perfectly balanced. Together, they were seen as a model of frontier industriousness, a hardworking couple who had carved out a respectable life for themselves. But behind the starched curtains and the welcoming smiles lay a horrifying secret, a forbidden truth concealed by the mundane rhythm of their daily lives. The disappearances did not begin with a sudden, noticeable spike. They were a slow, creeping sickness, a statistical anomaly that took years to fester into a recognizable pattern. The first to vanish was likely a man named Arthur Vance in the spring of 1878. A young man from Ohio, barely 20 years old, he was heading west to seek his fortune in the silver mines of Colorado. His letters home were filled with youthful optimism. He wrote to his mother of the beautiful Arkansas landscape and of the remarkably kind woman, a Mrs. Blackwood, who ran the boarding house where he was resting for a few days. He praised her cooking, especially a special pork stew she served, which he claimed was the richest he had ever tasted. He promised to write again from Fort Smith in a week's time. That letter was the last his family ever received. When weeks turned into months, his frantic mother wrote to the local sheriff in Hot Springs pleading for information. A cursory inquiry was made. The Blackwoods were questioned. Elspeth, her face a mask of concern, confirmed that Mr. Vance had stayed with them. A lovely, polite young man, she recalled. He had paid his bill in full and left one morning before sunrise, eager to continue his journey west. He had seemed in high spirits. There was no reason to suspect foul play. He was a young man on the move, and the frontier was a dangerous place. He could have been robbed on the road, taken ill in the wilderness, or simply decided to change his plans. The sheriff, burdened by a town full of more immediate and violent crimes, closed the file. Arthur Vance was just another soul lost to the vast, indifferent expanse of America. He was the first, but he would be far from the last. Over the next 4 years, the Willow Creek Inn became a silent, efficient machine of disappearance. The victims fit a specific, carefully selected profile. They were almost always men, traveling alone. They were strangers to the area, with no friends or family nearby to raise an immediate alarm. Often, they were men of some means, salesmen with full cash boxes, prospectors returning from the gold fields, or land speculators carrying their life savings. They arrived on the evening stagecoach, tired and hungry, and were directed to the welcoming lights of the Willow Creek Inn. They would be greeted warmly by Elspeth Blackwood, who would offer them a clean room and a plate of her famous stew. She had an uncanny ability to assess a man's worth with a single, sweeping glance, and an even greater talent for drawing out their stories, learning of their plans, their destinations, and most importantly, who might come looking for them if they failed to arrive. Those who were deemed suitable, solitary, flush with cash, and with no one expecting them soon, were offered the inn's finest room. It was a comfortable, quiet room at the back of the house, overlooking the dense woods. It was also conveniently located, with a sturdy, reinforced door and a floor that, unbeknownst to its occupants, was designed for easy cleaning. No one ever checked out of that room. The next morning, their horse and buggy would be gone, presumably sold by Sela's in a neighboring county. Their luggage would be burned in the dead of night, and their presence would be meticulously erased from the inn's official guest register. It was a horrifyingly perfect system, a cold, calculated business model built on murder and cannibalism, operating in plain sight. The whispers began, as they always do, as idle gossip, as dark jokes shared over whiskey in the town saloons. Travelers had always been known to go missing in the Ozarks, but the sheer volume of stories that seemed to end at the Willow Creek Inn started to feel different. A stable hand might mention that the Blackwoods seemed to acquire a new horse and buggy with startling regularity, always claiming they'd bought it from a guest who was in a hurry to leave. A laundress who occasionally worked for the inn spoke of strange, rust-colored stains on the floorboards of one particular room, stains that no amount of lye or scrubbing could fully remove. She was promptly dismissed by Elspeth for her morbid imagination. People started to notice that the inn's smokehouse ran day and night, even in the blistering heat of summer, filling the air with a strangely sweet, greasy smoke that was unlike any hickory or mesquite they had ever smelled. Some townsfolk, when pressed, would admit that while Elspeth Blackwood's meat pies were undeniable, why delicious, the meat itself had a texture and richness that was unusual. Not quite pork, not quite veal. A local butcher grew suspicious when Silas Blackwood, who raised no pigs of his own, began regularly selling him large quantities of specialty pork at a price well below market value. The butcher, fearing for his own business and perhaps his own safety, eventually stopped buying from Silas, telling his wife that the meat didn't feel right. These were all just disparate threads of unease, easily dismissed on their own. But woven together, they began to form a disturbing tapestry, a forbidden pattern of dread that the town, in its collective denial, refused to see. The fragile piece of denial was shattered in the fall of 1882 with the arrival of a man named Thomas Ryder. Ryder was not a solitary traveler. He was a Pinkerton detective from Chicago, a tenacious and methodical investigator hired by the wealthy family of a vanished businessman named Henry Gable. Gable, a prominent land speculator, had been en route to a major deal in Texas. His last letter to his wife was postmarked from Hot Springs, and in it he mentioned his comfortable lodgings at the Willow Creek Inn. When he failed to arrive in Dallas, his family, unlike the families of previous victims, had the resources and the influence to demand a real investigation. Ryder arrived in town not as a lawman, but under the guise of a wealthy tourist seeking the healing waters. He was a keen observer of human nature, and he immediately sensed the undercurrent of fear that permeated any discussion of the Blackwoods' establishment. He saw how people's eyes would shift, how their voices would lower when he mentioned the inn's name. He spent days subtly questioning the townsfolk, buying drinks for saloon patrons and making idle chat with shopkeepers. He pieced together the scattered rumors, the missing travelers, the strange meat, the ever-burning smokehouse. He learned that the local sheriff's office had a small but growing collection of missing persons inquiries, all of which shared a common, chilling denominator. The last known location was always the Willow Creek Inn. Ryder knew he was circling something deeply evil. He decided the only way to uncover the truth was to see the place for himself. He packed a small valise containing his belongings, a loaded revolver, and a journal to document his findings. Then, under a bruised purple twilight sky, he walked up the path to the boarding house from which so many had never returned. Elspeth Blackwood greeted Thomas Ryder at the door with her customary thin-lipped smile. Her eyes, like chips of obsidian, scanned him from head to toe, performing their silent, predatory calculus. She saw a well-dressed man with expensive leather boots and a heavy gold watch chain, a prize catch. She offered him her finest room, the one at the back of the house, and promised him a dinner that would, in her words, put the life back into a weary traveler. Ryder, playing his part, expressed his gratitude and complimented the inn's cozy atmosphere. But beneath his calm exterior, his senses were on high alert. He noted the unsettling cleanliness of the place. It was almost sterile, as if scrubbed clean of any life or history. He saw the way Silas, looming in the background, watched him with dull, emotionless eyes. During dinner, Ryder was served the infamous stew. It was thick, rich, and unnervingly savory. As he forced himself to eat, he engaged Elspeth in conversation, telling her of his supposed business ventures and his plans to stay in the area for at least a week. He wanted her to believe he was a long-term guest, someone whose disappearance would be gradual, not sudden. He was buying himself time. After the meal, he retired to his room, complimenting the lock on the door. "One can't be too careful these days," he said, watching Elspeth's reaction. A flicker of something, amusement. Annoyance crossed her face before being replaced by her placid mask. Inside the room, Ryder didn't sleep. He barricaded the door with a heavy dresser and sat in a chair, his revolver in his lap, listening to the house settle. He could hear the floorboards creaking in the hallway, the low murmur of the Blackwoods' voices from downstairs, and a faint, rhythmic sound from the cellar below, a dull, methodical chopping. As dawn broke, casting a sickly gray light through the window, Thomas Ryder knew he had to get a message out. He couldn't risk a direct confrontation. Silas was a formidable brute, and Elspeth possessed a chilling, reptilian cunning. His only hope was to alert the authorities without raising the Blackwoods' suspicion. Feigning a sudden bout of illness from the rich food, he stumbled out of his room, looking pale and weak. He told a concerned Elspeth that he needed to send an urgent telegram to his business partner in Little Rock to inform him of his delay. He offered to pay her son, a lanky, quiet boy of about 15 who helped around the inn, to ride into town and send it for him. Elspeth, likely seeing this as a sign of his vulnerability and believing he was too sick to be a threat, agreed. The telegram Ryder wrote was a masterpiece of coded language. On the surface, it was a simple business message about a delayed shipment of goods, but woven into it were specific phrases and numbers he had prearranged with the Pinkerton Agency's regional office, a distress signal that would be understood by them and them alone. It said, in essence, grave danger, suspects confirmed, location compromised, send immediate armed assistance, do not approach openly. He gave the message and a silver dollar to the boy, watching him ride off toward town. Ryder then returned to his room, his feigned illness providing the perfect cover to remain locked inside. He knew the clock was ticking. The telegram would take hours to reach its destination and even longer for help to be dispatched. He was now a prisoner in the Macabre boarding house, armed with only his wits and a single revolver, waiting for either rescue or a violent, horrifying death. The man who received Ryder's coded telegram was not a local lawman, but a federal marshal based out of Fort Smith, a man by the name of John Hardin. Hardin was a veteran of the frontier, a man who had seen the worst of human depravity and had grown weary of the slow, grinding gears of small-town justice. He had been peripherally aware of the unsettling rumors surrounding Hot Springs, and the Pinkerton Agency had already shared their file on the missing Henry Gable with his office. Ryder's telegram was the spark that ignited the powder keg. It bypassed the local sheriff, whom the Pinkertons suspected might be either incompetent or willfully blind, and went straight to a man with federal authority and a reputation for decisive action. Hardin didn't hesitate. He assembled a posse of 4 trusted deputies, hard men who wouldn't flinch in the face of the unknown. They armed themselves not just with rifles and sidearms, but with heavy-duty tools, axes, pry bars, and sledgehammers. Hardin had a sinking feeling that whatever they were about to uncover at the Willow Creek Inn was not merely a case of robbery and murder, but something far more disturbing, something that would require them to break down more than just doors. The official records of what happened next are sparse, almost deliberately vague, as if the truth was too horrifying to commit to paper. But the local legends, the stories passed down in hushed tones through generations, paint a vivid and terrifying picture of the day Marshal Hardin and his men rode to the boarding house that cooked its guests. If you are compelled by these forbidden histories that have been buried by time, make sure to subscribe, because the trail of vanishings at the Willow Creek Inn was about to lead to a truly macabre discovery. Marshal Hardin's posse did not ride up the main path to the Willow Creek Inn. They were not fools. They approached from the dense woods at the rear of the property, moving with the quiet stealth of hunters stalking a dangerous predator. The afternoon was still and heavy with humidity, the only sounds the buzzing of cicadas and the distant, rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood. As they drew closer, they saw Silas Blackwood in the yard, his back to them, methodically chopping firewood near the smokehouse. The sweet, greasy smoke Hardin had heard whispers about billowed from its chimney, thick and nauseating in the stagnant air. Hardin made a silent hand signal. 2 deputies fanned out to cover the front of the house, while Hardin and the other 2 advanced on Silas. He never heard them coming. One moment he was raising the axe, the next he was on the ground, the cold steel of a rifle barrel pressed against his neck. The fight went out of the giant man instantly. His face, usually a mask of stoic indifference, crumpled into something resembling fear. Inside the house, the commotion had alerted Elspeth. She appeared at the back door, a dishcloth in her hand, her expression one of mild annoyance. When she saw her husband pinned to the ground and the grim-faced lawman, her face didn't register shock or panic. Instead, her features hardened into a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Her eyes, cold and black, darted between the men, calculating, searching for a weakness. "Marshal," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion, "to what do we owe this unexpected and rather rude intrusion?" The chilling normality of her tone sent a shiver down Hardin's spine. This was not the reaction of an innocent woman. Hardin ignored Elspeth's question, his focus entirely on the scene before him. "Check the smokehouse," he ordered one of his deputies, a man named Evans. Evans, his face grim, slid back the heavy wooden bolt on the smokehouse door and pulled it open. A wave of rancid, superheated air rolled out, carrying with it a smell so vile it made the men gag. It was the smell of cooked meat, but horribly wrong, corrupted. Hanging from the rafters on thick iron hooks were not hams or sides of bacon, but grotesque, unidentifiable cuts of flesh, blackened and dripping with a dark, thick grease. And on a large wooden table in the center of the small building lay something that would be seared into Evans's memory forever. A human ribcage picked clean of all meat, the bones scored with the fine marks of a sharp knife. Evans stumbled back out into the daylight, his face ashen, and vomited into the bushes. The evidence was undeniable, the horrifying truth of the rumors laid bare. At the sight of the smokehouse's contents, Elspeth's cold composure finally cracked, but she did not scream or cry. A strange, twisted smile spread across her face. "The meat is a little rich for some people's tastes," she said, her voice dripping with a mocking, theatrical sweetness. "A man has to make a living, Marshal. And good meat is hard to come by." It was a confession, delivered with a chilling pride that was far more terrifying than any denial. The depravity of her statement, the sheer monstrosity of a mind that could view human beings as livestock, left the hardened lawmen speechless. They had come expecting to find evidence of murder. They had found evidence of an industrial-scale butchery. While two deputies secured the now sobbing Silas and the icily defiant Elspeth, Marshal Hardin and his remaining men turned their attention to the house itself. They were no longer just searching for evidence of a single murder, they were excavating a tomb. The ground floor was eerily tidy, a testament to Elspeth's obsessive cleanliness. But the air was thick with the faint, metallic scent of bleach and old blood, a smell that scrubbing couldn't erase. They moved upstairs, their boots echoing in the silent house. They found the guest room at the back, the one Thomas Ryder had described. The door was, as he'd noted, unusually thick and fitted with a heavy deadbolt on the outside. Inside, the room was Spartan, but the floorboards told a dark story. Despite being scrubbed raw, the cracks between the planks were stained a deep, dark brown. Hardin took his knife and scraped at the residue. It was dried blood, old and flaked, a silent testament to the horrors that had occurred there. In a small chest at the foot of the bed, they found a collection of personal effects: a silver locket containing a portrait of a woman and child, a pair of spectacles with a cracked lens, a leather-bound diary filled with elegant, looping script. These were the last remnants of the vanished, trophies kept by their killers. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. Following an instinct, a nagging feeling that the true heart of this evil lay deeper, Hardin led his men to the cellar door in the kitchen. It was locked and barred from the outside. Using a sledgehammer, they shattered the lock and descended the stone steps into the darkness, into the cold, foul-smelling air below. The scene that greeted Marshal Hardin in the cellar was a vision from Dante's Inferno, a charnel house of unimaginable horror. This was the hub of the Blackwood's Macabre enterprise. The space had been converted into a fully functional abattoir. A large, slanted stone slab, fitted with a drain that emptied into a dark pit in the corner, served as a butchering table. It was stained with years of dried blood. Hanging from chains on the ceiling were an array of gruesome tools: meat hooks, cleavers, bone saws, and long, thin knives of a type Hardin had never seen before. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars of strange, rendered fats and pickled organs. But it was the barrels that drew their immediate attention, the same barrels that would later be discovered containing the salted, dismembered remains of at least a dozen different individuals. In the far corner of the cellar, they found a large, cast-iron cauldron sitting over a blackened fire pit. The cauldron was filled with a thick, gelatinous substance, and simmering within it were human bones, being boiled clean of any remaining flesh. This was the source of the specialty, fats and soaps that Elspeth occasionally sold in town. It was a factory of death, a place where human beings were systematically disassembled and processed like cattle. The efficiency of it all was what was most horrifying. This wasn't the work of frenzied madmen. It was the cold, methodical work of artisans, their craft being murder and their medium being human flesh. In that moment, Marshall Hardin understood that he was not dealing with simple killers. He was dealing with monsters who wore human skin. Amidst the carnage of the cellar, one of Hardin's deputies made another, more personal discovery. Tucked away in a dusty crate beneath a pile of bloody burlap sacks, he found the valise belonging to Thomas Ryder. Its contents were spilled across the dirt floor. His journal lay open, its pages detailing his initial suspicions and his growing fear during his short, terrifying stay at the inn. The last entry was chillingly abrupt, the handwriting shaky. It read, "They know, I hear him at the door, God help." The sentence was unfinished, ending in a dark smear of ink, as if the pen had been violently wrenched from his hand. Ryder's revolver was there as well, its chamber still holding all 6 rounds unfired. He never even had a chance to defend himself. His fate was sealed the moment he stepped into the inn. The discovery confirmed Hardin's worst fears. Ryder had not escaped. He had become just another ingredient in the Blackwood's horrifying pantry. His meticulously planned investigation had ended here, in this stinking, subterranean hell. The coded telegram had been his last, desperate act, a message in a bottle cast into a sea of darkness, a final attempt to bring justice to this house of horrors. The thought of the brave Pinkerton agent, alone and facing certain death, filled Hardin with a cold, professional rage. He had failed to save Ryder, but he would be damned if he failed to make his killers answer for their crimes. The investigation was over. The prosecution was about to begin. The disturbing case of the boarding house that cooked its guests was about to become a national sensation, a tale of frontier horror that would shock a nation. The arrest of Silas and Elspeth Blackwood sent a shockwave through the community of Hot Springs. The initial reaction was one of disbelief. The Blackwoods were their neighbors. They were the quiet, hard-working couple who sold pies at the church bake sale. The idea that they were capable of such monstrous acts was simply too fantastic to comprehend. But as the deputies began carting the evidence out of the inn, the barrels of human remains, the gruesome tools from the cellar, the pitiful collection of victims' belongings, disbelief curdled into horror and, for many, a profound sense of guilt. The rumors that had been whispered for years were not just gossip, they were unheard cries for help. The strange-tasting meat pies, the oddly acquired horses, the sweet, cloying smoke, it all clicked into place with a sickening finality. The townspeople were forced to confront a horrifying possibility, that they themselves had been unwitting participants in the Blackwoods' cannibalistic enterprise. Had the special pork they'd bought from Silas for their family dinner been one of the missing travelers? Had the savory stew they enjoyed at the inn's public dining room been made from a man who had slept in the room above them the night before? The psychological toll was immense. A collective paranoia swept through the town. People looked at their neighbors with suspicion. The trust that holds a small community together was shattered. The Willow Creek Inn, once a symbol of rustic charm, was now a monument to their collective blindness, a haunted place that stood as a testament to the evil they had allowed to fester in their midst. The interrogation of the Blackwoods revealed 2 very different facets of human evil. Silas, when separated from his wife, crumbled completely. He was a broken man, a simple-minded brute who had been utterly dominated by Elspeth's powerful will. Through his terrified, rambling confession, a pathetic story emerged. He claimed it had all started with a single act of violence, a guest who had tried to assault Elspeth. In a fit of rage, Silas had killed the man. Faced with a body and the certainty of hanging, it was Elspeth, he claimed, who came up with the practical solution of disposing of the evidence in the most efficient way possible. She was the one who suggested butchering the body, arguing that it was no different from dressing a deer. She was the one who, seeing the opportunity, turned that single, desperate act into a cold and profitable business model. Silas was the hands, the brute force that carried out the killings and the grisly work in the cellar. He swung the hammer or the axe, his mind numb to the horror of his actions. He described the process in chillingly mundane detail, as if he were talking about his daily chores. But he insisted over and over that it was all Elspeth's idea. He was terrified of her, more so than he was of the hangman's noose. He was a monster, yes, but a monster of his wife's creation. He followed her commands out of a twisted sense of loyalty and a deep-seated fear of her cold, calculating wrath. Elspeth Blackwood's interrogation was a far different affair. She displayed no remorse, no fear, no guilt. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, and regarded Marshall Hardin with an air of detached intellectual curiosity, as if he were an interesting but slightly annoying insect. She refused to confess in the traditional sense. Instead, she spoke of her actions with a chilling, philosophical detachment. She saw her victims not as human beings, but as a resource, a commodity. In her twisted worldview, the travelers who came to her inn were weak, fooly livestock who were destined to be consumed by stronger predators. She was simply a more efficient predator. "The world is a hard place, Marshall," she reportedly said, her voice calm and even. "It takes and it takes. I simply took what was offered. Men came to my door, their pockets full and their heads empty. They were a crop waiting to be harvested. Was I to let all that good meat go to waste?" She spoke of the logistics with the pride of a successful businesswoman, detailing how she managed the finances, selected the victims, and perfected her recipes. She showed no emotion, even when describing the dismemberment of her guests. To her, it was simply a problem of physics and biology. There was no malice in her words, only a profound and terrifying emptiness, a complete absence of empathy. She was the true architect of the horror, the cold, calculating brain behind Silas's brawn. Marshall Hardin, who had stared down hardened killers and ruthless outlaws, would later admit that nothing in his life had ever frightened him as much as the placid, intelligent evil of Elspeth Blackwood. The trial of Silas and Elspeth Blackwood was a national spectacle. Newspapers from as far away as New York and San Francisco sent reporters to the small Arkansas town, eager to print every lurid detail of the cannibal in case. The courtroom was packed every day with a morbidly curious public, craning their necks to get a look at the monsters in their midst. The prosecution, led by a firebrand district attorney, laid out its case with meticulous, horrifying detail. They presented the physical evidence from the inn, the tools, the bones, the barrels of salted remains. They brought witness after witness to the stand, townspeople who testified about the suspicious activities, and family members of the victims who gave tearful accounts of their lost loved ones. The most powerful evidence was Silas's own detailed confession, read aloud in court, which painted a gruesome picture of the inn's daily operations. Through it all, Silas sat with his head bowed, weeping silently. Elspeth, however, remained impassive. She watched the proceedings with an unnerving calm, her cold eyes fixed on the jury. She refused to take the stand in her own defense, and her court-appointed lawyer, faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, could offer little more than a token effort. The trial became less about determining guilt or innocence, that was a foregone conclusion, and more about the public's need to confront and comprehend the nature of the Blackwoods' evil. It was a macabre piece of theater, and the entire nation was watching, captivated and repulsed in equal measure. One of the most disturbing questions that arose during the trial was that of the Blackwood's son. The boy, whose name was Samuel, was around 15 years old at the time of his parents' arrest. He was a gaunt, silent youth who had spent his entire life within the horrifying ecosystem of the Willow Creek Inn. The question on everyone's mind was, what did he know? And more chillingly was he involved. Samuel was held as a material witness, but he proved to be a psychological enigma. He barely spoke, and when he did, his answers were vague and contradictory. He seemed to exist in a state of profound emotional detachment, his eyes vacant, as if he had retreated to a place deep within himself where the horrors couldn't reach him. He claimed he knew nothing of the murders, that his parents had told him the cellar and smokehouse were strictly forbidden, and that he believed his father was simply a very prolific and secretive butcher of wild game. Most people found this hard to believe. How could a boy live in that house, smell those smells, and see those things without knowing the truth? Others argued that he was a victim himself, psychologically savaged by his monstrous parents and trapped in a world of coercive control. The prosecution ultimately decided they lacked sufficient evidence to charge him as an accomplice. He was a ghost, a cipher at the heart of the case. After the trial, he was sent to an orphanage in another state under a new name, vanishing from the historical record. His true role in the macabre affairs of the Willow Creek Inn remains one of the case's most unsettling and forbidden mysteries. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. The verdict was never in doubt, guilty, on all counts of murder. The judge, his voice trembling with a mixture of fury and revulsion, sentenced both Silas and Elspeth Blackwood to death by hanging. The execution date was set for 1 month later. In the intervening weeks, Silas was consumed by religious fervor. He met daily with a priest, confessing his sins and begging for divine forgiveness. He was a man haunted, broken by the weight of his atrocities, seeking solace in the promise of an afterlife. Elspeth, true to form, sought no such comfort. She refused all visitors, including the priest. She spent her final days in her cell reading. Her demeanor as calm and collected as it had been throughout the trial. She made no final statement, offered no apology, and showed not a flicker of fear or remorse. On the day of the execution, a massive crowd gathered in the town square. It was a grim, public spectacle. Silas had to be dragged to the gallows, a sobbing, incoherent mess. His final words were a strangled plea for God's mercy. Elspeth walked to her death with a straight back and a steady gaze. She stood upon the gallows, looked out over the sea of faces, and according to eyewitness accounts, allowed a small, knowing smile to cross her lips just before the hood was placed over her head. It was her final, silent act of defiance, a chilling testament to an evil so profound it felt ancient, almost elemental. With the snap of the rope, the reign of the cannibal innkeepers was over, but the dark stain they left on the town and its history would never wash away. In the immediate aftermath of the executions, the town of Hot Springs was faced with a difficult question: what to do with the Willow Creek Inn. The building itself had become a source of profound communal shame and a magnet for morbid curiosity seekers. No one wanted to live near it, yet no one had the heart to tear it down. It stood empty and silent, its windows like vacant eyes staring out over the town it had terrorized. The bank foreclosed on the property, but there were no buyers. The place was deemed cursed, haunted by the tormented spirits of the dozens of victims who had met their end within its walls. People reported hearing strange noises coming from the empty house at night, the sound of crying, the rhythmic thud of an axe, the faint smell of that sweet, greasy smoke on the wind. Children dared each other to run up and touch the porch railing, and local ghost stories were born. After nearly a year of sitting derelict, a decision was finally made. One moonless night, a group of masked men, rumored to be the relatives of some of the victims, rode to the property. They doused the inn with kerosene from cellar to attic and set it ablaze. The fire was immense, a towering inferno that could be seen for miles. It burned with a ferocious intensity, as if the flames themselves were trying to purge the evil that had soaked into the very wood. The townspeople watched from a distance, their faces illuminated by the cleansing fire. They were not just watching a building burn, they were watching the immolation of a nightmare. The burning of the Willow Creek Inn was supposed to be an act of closure, a way for the town to cauterize its deepest wound. But some stories are too disturbing to be erased by fire. The legend of the boarding house that cooked its guests refused to die. It became a part of the local folklore, a macabre cautionary tale told to frighten children and shock visitors. The site of the inn became a forbidden place. The grass and weeds grew wild over the charred foundation, but it was said that nothing would ever truly grow there again. The land was soured by the atrocities it had witnessed. For decades, the story was confined to the Arkansas Ozarks, a local horror whispered in hushed tones. But as time went on, it began to leak into the wider world, becoming one of America's great, unsolved cold cases of cannibalism, often mentioned in the same breath as the infamous Bender family of Kansas. The details became exaggerated with each retelling. The number of victims grew from dozens to hundreds. Elspeth Blackwood was transformed from a cunning sociopath into a demonic witch, and Silas into a monstrous, hulking ogre. The story became a myth, its historical roots obscured by a century of campfire tales and pulp horror retellings. Marshall Hardin was about to cross a threshold from which there was no return, stepping into a reality far more macabre than any rumor. We unearth these disturbing cold cases to ensure they are never forgotten. Join our community of historical investigators by hitting the like button if you believe these stories need to be told. Because what Hardin found in that cellar would haunt Arkansas forever. One of the most enduring and disturbing questions left in the wake of the Blackwood case is the true number of victims. The official indictment listed 12 murders, corresponding to the identifiable remains found in the salt barrels in the cellar. These were the victims whose disappearances could be corroborated with missing persons reports or the testimony of family members, individuals like Arthur Vance and Henry Gable. But Marshall Hardin and his deputies were convinced that this was only a fraction of the total. The sheer scale of the operation, the years it had been running, and the vast quantity of unidentified bone fragments found in the ash pit, and the cauldron suggested a number that was far, far higher. How many lone travelers, penniless drifters, or desperate souls seeking a cure passed through those doors and were never heard from again? How many? People vanished whose absence would go completely unnoticed in the transient, chaotic world of the 19th century frontier. Some estimates, based on the volume of specialty pork Silas sold over the years and the inn's occupancy rates, place the potential victim count as high as 50, or even more. The Blackwoods ledger, which might have provided a partial answer, was one of the first things Elspeth managed to toss into the kitchen stove as Hardin's men stormed the property. The truth, it seems, was deliberately burned, leaving only speculation and the horrifying certainty that dozens of forgotten souls ended their lives as ingredients in Elspeth Blackwood's larder, their names and stories lost to time forever. The psychological profile of Elspeth Blackwood has fascinated criminologists and historians for over a century. In an era before the terms sociopath or psychopath were part of the common lexicon, those who encountered her struggled to find the words to describe her particular brand of evil. She was not a ranting lunatic or a wild-eyed killer. Her evil was quiet, intelligent, and deeply unsettling in its rationality. Modern analysis suggests she was a classic example of a malignant narcissist with extreme psychopathic traits. She possessed a grandiose sense of self-importance, viewing others not as peers but as tools or obstacles. Her complete lack of empathy allowed her to commit unspeakable acts without a shred of guilt or remorse. To her, murder was not a crime of passion, it was a business decision. Cannibalism was not a taboo, it was waste management. She likely derived a profound sense of power and control from her secret life, delighting in the knowledge that she held the power of life and death over her unsuspecting guests, and that the very community that praised her piety was unknowingly consuming the evidence of her crimes. Her relationship with Silas was likely one of pure manipulation. She would have identified his weak will and psychological dependencies early on, molding him into her perfect instrument. He was the hammer, but she was the hand that wielded it, directing his violence with precision and purpose. She remains a chilling case study in the banality of evil, a horrifying reminder that the most monstrous predators are often the ones who wear the most convincing human masks. The legacy of the Willow Creek Inn is not just one of murder and cannibalism, but also one of profound institutional failure. How could such a horrifying enterprise operate for so long, in plain sight, without being stopped? The answer lies in the context of the time and place. The hot springs of the 1880s was a town overwhelmed. The local sheriff's department was small, underfunded, and focused on the more visible crimes of robbery, gambling disputes, and public drunkenness that plagued the bustling resort town. The concept of forensic science was in its infancy. Investigations into missing persons, especially transient individuals, were given the lowest priority. There was a prevailing attitude on the frontier that a man was responsible for his own safety. If a traveler went missing, it was presumed he had fallen victim to the natural dangers of the wilderness or the common criminality of the road. No one wanted to believe that a monster was living in their midst, running a respectable-looking boarding house. The Blackwoods exploited this systemic weakness perfectly. They chose their victims with care, ensuring they were people who wouldn't be easily missed. They maintained a flawless public facade. The collective denial of the community, the unwillingness to believe the dark rumors, provided them with the perfect cover. The case serves as a disturbing lesson in how easily evil can flourish when good people choose to look the other way, and when the systems designed to protect the innocent are simply not equipped to hunt for the most unthinkable of horrors. While the story of the Blackwoods is a singular horror, it echoes a darker, more forbidden pattern in American history. The 19th century was rife with tales of man-traps, isolated inns, taverns, or homes that lured in weary travelers for the purpose of robbery and murder. The infamous Bloody Benders of Kansas, a family who operated a small inn on the Osage Trail in the early 1870s, are the most famous example. Like the Blackwoods, they murdered their guests and buried them on their property. Stories of robber barons and killer innkeepers were a staple of frontier folklore, tapping into the very real anxiety of traveling through a vast, untamed, and often lawless land. What sets the Blackwood case apart, elevating it from a simple story of greed-fueled murder to something far more macabre, is the element of cannibalism and commercialization. The Benders killed for money. The Blackwoods killed for money and for raw materials. They created a vertically integrated system of slaughter, processing, and distribution that is utterly unique in the annals of American crime. They didn't just hide their victims, they recycled them. This industrial approach to murder, this transformation of human beings into a commercial product, is what makes their story so profoundly disturbing. It moves beyond the realm of simple crime and into something almost mythological in its depravity, a uniquely American Gothic nightmare born from the dark, hungry heart of the frontier. What became of the land where the Willow Creek Inn once stood? For nearly a century, the property remained untouched. The charred foundation became overgrown with thorny brambles and poison ivy, as if the earth itself was trying to protect the cursed ground. Locals avoided it, and it gained a reputation as one of the most haunted locations in Arkansas. Children who grew up in the area were told that if you stood by the old well on the property at dusk, you could hear the whispers of the dead begging to be found. In the 1970s, during a period of urban expansion, a developer bought the land with plans to build a small housing subdivision. The project was plagued by problems from the start. Construction equipment would mysteriously malfunction. Workers reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread and of being watched. The project was eventually abandoned after a series of unsettling discoveries. While excavating for a new sewer line, workers unearthed a pit filled with human bones, small, fragmented pieces that had been missed in the original investigation. The discovery made local news, briefly reviving the old horror story. The bones were collected by the county coroner, determined to be from at least 5 more unidentified individuals, and were eventually interred in a mass grave at the local cemetery. The housing project was scrapped, and the land was once again left to the weeds and the ghosts. To this day, the plot remains empty, a bald spot in the landscape, a permanent and chilling memorial to the horrors that transpired there. The case of the Willow Creek Inn left an indelible scar on the field of law enforcement. It served as a brutal wake-up call, highlighting the terrifying new forms of criminality that could emerge in a rapidly changing America. The sheer scale and methodical nature of the Blackwoods operation forced federal and state authorities to reconsider their approach to missing persons cases. The realization that dozens of people could vanish without a trace, their disappearances unconnected until it was too late, prompted calls for better systems of communication between different law enforcement jurisdictions. The Pinkerton Detective Agency, whose agent Thomas Ryder became one of the final victims, used the case as a powerful argument for the necessity of private, professional investigators who could cross state lines and operate outside the confines of local politics and incompetence. The case also had a profound, albeit gruesome, impact on the nascent field of forensics. The process of identifying the victims from the dismembered remains in the barrels was a landmark effort in forensic anthropology, requiring doctors and scientists to develop new methods for cataloging and reassembling human bodies. The sheer horror of the crime scene forced investigators to become more meticulous, more scientific in their approach, planting the seeds for the modern crime scene investigation techniques we know today. The Blackwoods, in their monstrousness, inadvertently helped to shape the very methods that would be used to hunt their future counterparts. The story has been told and retold so many times that the line between fact and folklore has become hopelessly blurred. Did Elspeth Blackwood truly smile on the gallows? Was the smoke from the inn really as uniquely sweet and foul as the legends claim? Did the Blackwood son, Samuel, truly know nothing, or was he a silent, traumatized accomplice? The historical record is frustratingly thin, composed of sensationalized newspaper articles, a few terse court documents, and the oral histories of a community that was desperate to forget. There are no known photographs of Selah's or Elspeth Blackwood. No definitive, complete list of their victims exists. Their story exists in a kind of twilight space, a disturbing cold case that is too old and too poorly documented to ever be fully solved. This ambiguity is precisely what gives the legend its enduring power. It allows our own worst fears to fill in the gaps. The lack of concrete detail makes the horror feel more universal, more archetypal. The Willow Creek Inn becomes more than just a specific place. It becomes a symbol of the terrifying possibility that evil can be hiding anywhere, behind any welcoming smile, in any charming house on the edge of town. The story is a canvas onto which we project our anxieties about the darkness that lurks just beneath the surface of civilized society, a timeless reminder that the real monsters are not the ones in fairy tales, but the ones who live next door. One of the most chilling aspects of the Blackwood case is the economic motive. Theirs was not a crime of passion or insanity in the conventional sense. It was a business. They identified a market inefficiency, a surplus of unmissed travelers and a demand for cheap meat and provisions, and they filled it with ruthless, psychopathic ingenuity. They were, in a twisted sense, entrepreneurs of murder. By killing their guests, they acquired their cash and personal belongings. By butchering them, they created a product, specialty pork, soap, lard, that could be sold for an additional profit. They even saved money on their own food costs. It was a closed, horrifyingly self-sustaining economic loop. This commercialization of atrocity is what makes their crimes so profoundly modern and disturbing. It speaks to a darkness that goes beyond simple bloodlust. It is the logic of the assembly line applied to human slaughter, the reduction of human life to its base value as a collection of raw materials. This cold, utilitarian evil is arguably more terrifying than the frenzied violence of a madman. It suggests that, under the right circumstances, with the right lack of empathy, the most unspeakable acts can be rationalized and justified not by hatred or delusion, but by the simple, chilling logic of profit and loss. The Willow Creek Inn was not just a house of horrors. It was a horrifyingly successful small business. In the years following the fire, relic hunters and souvenir seekers would occasionally sift through the ashes of the Willow Creek Inn, looking for a piece of the macabre history. Most found nothing but charred wood and twisted nails. But one story, likely apocryphal but persistent nonetheless, tells of a boy in the early 1900s who found something half buried in the earth near the old smokehouse foundation. It was a small metal tin, the kind used for tobacco or sweets. Inside, preserved from the fire, was a single, disturbing object, a small, crudely carved doll made from what appeared to be a piece of bone, wrapped in a scrap of cloth from a woman's dress. The most unsettling feature was the doll's face. It had no eyes, no nose, just a single, thin line carved into it, a lipless mouth fixed in a permanent, unnerving smile. The boy, terrified by his discovery, supposedly threw the object into the deepest part of the nearby creek and never spoke of it again until he was an old man. The story is almost certainly a fabrication, another piece of folklore layered onto the legend. And yet it persists. It speaks to our need to find some tangible remnant of the evil, some cursed object that can contain and represent the horror. It also evokes a chilling question. Who would have made such a thing? Was it a trophy kept by Elspeth? Or was it the secret, silent handiwork of the boy, Samuel, a quiet testament to the forbidden world he inhabited? The tale of the Willow Creek Inn serves as a brutal reminder of the thinness of the veil that separates civilization from savagery. The town of Hot Springs in 1882 considered itself a modern, civilized place. It had churches, hotels, bathhouses, and a developing system of law. Yet on its outskirts, a primitive, predatory evil was allowed to operate unchecked for years. The Blackwoods were not an aberration from another world. They were a product of their own. They were a symptom of a society in flux, a society grappling with the anonymity and moral ambiguity of the frontier. Their story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, our capacity for denial, our willingness to ignore the evil that is not directly threatening us, and the terrifying ease with which the sacred taboo of cannibalism can be broken when empathy is absent and opportunity presents itself. The boarding house was a microcosm of the frontier's dark side, a place where the promise of a new life and the reality of a brutal death existed under the same roof. It challenges our modern sense of security, reminding us that the systems we rely on for protection are fragile, and that the darkness the Blackwoods represented never truly goes away. It only changes its name and its location, waiting patiently for the right combination of circumstances to emerge once more from the shadows. Over 140 years have passed since Marshall Hardin kicked open the door to that cellar in Arkansas. The world has changed in ways that the people of 1882 could never have imagined. We have DNA testing, instant communication, and a vast network of law enforcement. A case like the Blackwoods, we tell ourselves, could never happen today. But could it? The core elements that allowed them to thrive, a transient population, the isolation of their victims, and the ability to maintain a facade of normality, are still very much a part of our world. Every year, thousands of people go missing, their cases growing cold, their families left without answers. They are the modern-day equivalents of the lone travelers who sought shelter at the Willow Creek. The story of Silas and Elspeth Blackwood is not just a piece of dark history. It is a timeless warning. It is a testament to the fact that monsters are not mythical creatures, but human beings whose inner worlds are devoid of the light of compassion. They are the predators who have learned to walk among the flock, their true nature hidden behind a mask of chilling banality. The case file may be officially closed, but the questions it raises remain horrifyingly open. In the end, what remains of the Willow Creek Inn is not a foundation or a set of court records, but a story. A deeply disturbing, macabre piece of American folklore that has been whispered in the dark for generations. It is a story about a house that was not a home, a meal that was not a mercy, and a smiling host who was a predator in disguise. The exact number of victims, the full extent of the son's involvement, the precise origins of Elspeth Blackwood's profound evil, these are secrets the past will likely never surrender. The fire that consumed the inn also consumed the final, definitive answers, leaving only the chilling outline of the horror. And perhaps that is its most enduring legacy. The empty spaces in the narrative, the unanswered questions, are what haunt us the most. They force us to imagine the unimaginable, to contemplate the true depths of human depravity. The site on the edge of Hot Springs remains vacant, a patch of cursed earth where a nightmare once played out in real life. And somewhere, buried deep in the soil or washed away by the creek, the final, forgotten pieces of the vanished guests may still lie, waiting for a discovery that will never come. Their only monument is this dark, forbidden tale, a cold case that has seeped into the very soul of the land, a permanent echo of the boarding house that cooked every guest.